We are so used to being at war with time. And think about what that is. And we don't even know what's on the other side. One of the advantages of the 30 days I spent in isolation is I had all kinds of time, man, especially when I was fasting. You want to make time slow down. Lock yourself in a cabin and don't eat for a few days. You can live a lifetime in a week.
Welcome to Task Time Energy, the purpose-filled productivity podcast. This podcast is about time management, procrastination, motivation, discipline, habits, and all kinds of topics that fall under this umbrella of productivity. We're talking about a particular kind of productivity. This is about productivity that aligns with our values and our most important goals in life. The kind of productivity that leaves you satisfied and energized. My name is Scott Miller. I'll be your host. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome to the show, everyone. Today we are here with Dave Gold. I'm very excited to have you here, Dave.
Scott, it's great to commune with you in this context.
Excellent. So, Dave, I'd like to share a little bit of your interesting story with our listeners and viewers. So, Dave is a lawyer. He graduated from law school in Pennsylvania and moved to West Virginia, started a small law firm in the storefront, which grew into one of the most successful personal injury law firms in the state of West Virginia. And you, Dave, in addition to serving your clients, you were also fighting against some of the corruption and discrimination that your clients were experiencing. You were kind of checking a lot of boxes there as a successful lawyer, successful businessman running your law firm, and a great human being helping these people and kind of fighting the good fight there. So I'd love to hear anything else you want to add about that, about your experience there.
Well, the first thought that popped into my mind, it kind of describes it, is when I started the firm, I moved down there, and we'll probably talk about this later, really following a spiritual teacher, and which was unexpected. He was an unorthodox teacher, and I was kind of an unlikely student for him as well. But that's why I happened to be in West Virginia, and I opened up a little storefront office, and I had no money. You don't learn anything in law school about practicing law. I don't know what it is you're supposed to get out of it, but other than, if you pass the bar license to practice law. But and I was also an outsider. I was Jewish. I was from the North. I had all kinds of strikes against me. And so clients were hard to find. And because I wasn't one of the inside courthouse gang, as my teacher called them, I was ostracized. It's not like I needed any more strikes against me, but just to make sure that this would be a great story to tell on your podcast in this moment, which was the whole reason I went through this, was I also that there was I would say, if I might sound paranoid, kind of, I thought, wow, there's like a conspiracy to run me out of town. And I remember once a woman came into my office, and I was so surprised that clients, anytime a client came in, like, why the heck would you come in to see me? And she said, I don't know if I should tell you this, but I was a waitress down. It was called the Lancer. It was the bar and restaurant where all the lawyers gathered for lunch. And she said, I heard the lawyers talking, and they convened a meeting, and they say, we got to run Dave Gold out of town. He's too dangerous. And she said, I made up my mind. If I ever needed a lawyer and you were still here, I was going to come to you. And that's a true story. We say in the law, never let the truth get in the way of a good story, but this is actually true and a good story. So I can talk more about that. But yeah, we start, and part of this was, I think I had a kind of a rebellious nature, and in a strong sense of right and wrong. At that point in my life, in my mid-20s, a lot of it's ego-driven, but there's also some integrity. But my teacher also, and we can talk more about him if it's, where you want to go. But my teacher just felt that you had to, whatever you wanted to attain spiritually, you had to manifest those values in your body. Mm-hmm. So you had to be fearless. You had to be single-minded. You had to have integrity. He said you put nothing ahead of the truth. Well, that means you put nothing ahead. And for him, I think the truth, as I reflect on it, the truth was doing the right thing while you were in your body. And so as a result, we ended up being the lawyers that you would hire if you had to sue a judge or the cops or, by City Hall. And then because we happen to have the largest Hare Krishna community in the world. It's at one point over 700 members in a county where I happen to be practicing law. And is now I can say it because there's actually been a racketeering trial, which I was actually subpoenaed as a witness to testify in, that it really was a criminal organization under the guise and at the expense of a lot of sincere people, including a lot of the members who, were just there because they believed in what they were doing. I ended up being our firm. I had my partners too. I don't want to make it seem like I was the only soldier there. We ended up being the lawyers that fought them, and that proved to be quite demanding and at time quite dangerous, and something you and I have talked about, to the point that there was literally a contract put on my life, and the contract was accepted by someone who was serving 2 life sentences, one in California and one in West Virginia, for other contract killers. So this was the real stuff. And I'm just this little Jewish boy from Pittsburgh coming down here trying to get enlightened, $2 practicing law. And I end up with this, kind of very dramatic lifestyle. So that was a long answer to a short question, but I think I touched on a lot of stuff. Hopefully I give you there's some more food there for more questions.
No, I mean, it's great, David, because we're going to talk about, we have some topics related to purpose-filled productivity that we want to talk to, but your life story is so interesting that I think it's great to share this with our viewers and listeners and let them, hear more about you. You and this law firm that you helped build, grew into, again, a hugely successful law firm. Has won millions of dollars worth of settlements for clients, still active today. Although I understand you're no longer actively involved in it. But you mentioned your spiritual teacher, and I think that's a whole other interesting dimension of your life that was happening at the same time. So while you were in law school, you met Richard Rose. And I'd love for you to tell people a little bit about Richard Rose and who he is.
Who he was. Wow. Well, I actually, I wrote a book about it, which I'm putting this up not because I want you to buy it, because my wife can't get through reading it, not because it's poorly written or not a good story, because it's too painful for her to see the kind of crap that I put up with. But Rose, so just a little background, my father died when I was 19. It was it's traumatic for anyone, and certainly in my experience, it was incredibly traumatic for lots and lots of reasons. Nothing special there, but for me, it was quite a devastating event. And a couple other traumas, what my teacher later called bumps on the head, happened. And I was in a very tender and vulnerable and confused state when I started law school. And a friend of mine said, "You got to come meet this enlightened." I didn't even know what the word enlightened. I had no spiritual context for that. I was just a nice Jewish boy. And so I went to a meeting. There were meetings were being held at University. I was in Pittsburgh, and this was at Pitt. And this guy was up there, and he just looked like he was plain spoken. He was very plainly dressed, and he didn't sound like he wasn't a hayseed, but he definitely had the vernacular and the persona of someone that we would associate stereotypically as someone from that part of the world, that part of the country. And I thought, I can take him. I sized him up. I said, "Hey, I've got like 2 months of law school under my belt. I'm ready to take on anybody." And I challenged him in the meeting, and he just undressed me psychically and psychologically and even historically in front of this room full of people, and talked about things that no one else knew, that no one else could know. So there was a kind of a psychic component, but also very psychologically astute. And it was humiliating and in its own momentarily devastating. But I also thought, holy cow, I don't know what the language stuff is here. So I'll keep it PG, but I will slip in a profanity from time to time. But I thought, wow, what the hell is this? And it intrigued me enough to come around, and then without getting the whole thing, he touched something in me. And the juxtaposition between the trauma and the confusion and just what kind of a mess I was, I use I put quotes around those words we'll talk about later, that I would never call anyone a mess in any state of their lives, but that's certainly how I perceive myself then, experienced my life. But the mess that I was, and this kind of transcendent freedom and clarity was really addictive and attractive. And without going the whole thing, when I graduated law school and after a year on the road, which is another story, I ended up moving in with him in his house. And this, I mean, when I say rant, my mother came in and cried for days. She saw we were a nice son. I didn't raise my son to be, it was just a really, I can't say dilapidated. It wasn't that bad, but it was quite Spartan and quite unwelcoming. So I lived in this environment with a man who was just, he felt the way to get enlightened was to break your ego. And the way to break your ego was to show you everything that was wrong with you and just create so much tension in your being and in your soul or whatever, that you just had to find some transcendence, just kind of burst your way through it. And so I'm having this very challenging law practice. I mean, anybody's challenging starting a business and a law practice, but especially under the conditions I alluded to earlier. And then coming home every day to his pretty much unrelenting, one would call it criticism, they call it confrontation. I don't know what the difference is, but was quite something and quite formative. And I think there's a lot of things that came out of it, and a lot of it transitioning into what you and I are most interested in, I think, at this moment, besides the good story of my life, is I conflated suffering with spiritual progress. And that was him. I wrote in the book, someone says, how do you know if you're spiritually moving? He said, if you're suffering, you're moving. And you don't need to tell a Jew to suffer. I mean, hell, that's, yeah, sure. I know how to do that. And so he encouraged it. And then I had that in me. And so there was a lot, and some of them were, just, I took disciplines on, like, celibacy and certain asceticism. And as we've talked before, 30 days a month, 30 days a year, I'd spend an entire month in a meditation cabin with no running water, electricity, or people, just meditating the whole time. So I did a lot of things that, that seem like suffering now, and which I don't recommend for others, but I am, in retrospect, grateful that I wouldn't want my daughter to do any of them, but I'm grateful that the formative role they might have played in my life. But one is I did start, it clicked in the idea that I needed to suffer to succeed in anything. And the path to success was rife with suffering in many different ways.
And Dave, I want to just step in for a moment, because I want to highlight what you just said, because I think in a moment we're going to get into our conversation about purpose-filled productivity, about relationship with time and work. And I think that idea that we have to suffer in order to succeed is something that so many people relate to, and maybe they haven't even thought of it consciously, but right now hearing you say that, they might be going, wow, I kind of feel that way. And I think we're going to get into a little bit of the impact that has on people's lives. But, just to kind of, put a frame around this picture. So, Richard Rose has been described as kind of an enlightened hillbilly. We think of spiritual teachers and Zen masters as these people living in Asia wearing robes and burning incense. And Richard Rose would have been wearing a pair of jeans and maybe, driving a tractor during the day, and then giving these amazing teachings, spiritual teachings, to his groups of students at night. And you spent 15 years, as his student, helping organize some of his workshops and his teachings, lectures, things like that. And so just an amazing experience that you had. And since then you have, you've helped, since leaving your law practice, you've helped start and, or have started yourself some successful business ventures, some additional ones. And I'd love for you to share with people what you're doing now. Can you tell people a little more about what you do right now?
And let me just to fill the gaps in real quick, is I had an experience where I was in my law practice, where I was diagnosed as having a tumor that was going to kill me in a matter of months. And that I did a little soul searching, as one might expect. And out of that, without going through the whole thing, because I want to get to answer your question, I knew it was time to leave the law practice. So I sold my interest in the practice, set about writing a book, ended up starting a company that turned into a software company. And it's interesting. It's something else too we can talk about in terms of our business model, such as it was, which I think is also instructive for what topic we had today. And then we were able to build that. We sold it right before the market crashed. I then ended up getting married, adopting a daughter. getting divorced, starting a few other companies, always mentoring, and I don't know what I'd call it, mentoring. It's more like spirit, but there's just different ways. For 8 or 9 years, we had spiritual groups and went on the campuses of Duke and UNC and NC State here in the Triangle area in North Carolina. And I mentored probably thousands of students. I like doing that, and then but also professionally, all kinds of stuff. And because men like us, Scott, we can't keep, we can't. That's not for keeping, is to quote the Who, and we just can't keep our mouths shut when it comes to the life wisdom that we have. And so that has evolved into what I do now, which is, it's interesting to try to put I had one of my clients asked me to work with his brother who was having some problems, and I showed him what I charged. He goes, wait a minute. He says life coaches charge this and therapists charge this. How could you? I said, hey, I'm not a life coach. I'm not a therapist. I'm a damn magician. So, I what I do is transformational alchemy, for lack of a better. And I've tried to tone it down and be modest, but I'm 70 years old, for Christ's sake. I'm not going to pretend to be anything other than I am. So what I do is I work with select people and organizations and whatever configurations kind of comes within my field. And when I say I work with it, I do this professionally, but as you know, Scott, I do it with everybody that comes into my life. I do it with a prime delivery guy. I do it with a lady that I'm calling up to cancel my cable service. I do it when I'm walking the dogs. First of all, I see, and I know this is an answer, I'm just answering this question like I've never been asked it before. Like, what does it mean in this moment staring out my window with you and my screen? I can't help but see the perfection in every human being that comes into my field. It doesn't mean, and at the same time, very insightful. I was a trial lawyer. I was at a sales company. I'm a student. I'm 70 years of this plan. I know human nature, so I know the foibles. I know the quirks. I know all that stuff. I see the innate perfection. Hold that innate perfection, and then start disabusing people of the reasons that they have internalized for disqualifying themselves, and sabotaging themselves, and doubting themselves, and even hating themselves. And simultaneous. And that's done in a particular context of what is it that you can do that nobody can do exactly the way you do it. So recognizing that our individuality, idiosyncrasies and all, and the things that we think disqualify us that we need to get rid of and perfect or transform, change, fix, heal, change, and improve, as Kanash Desai says, are actually our superpowers and are the things that make us, that are perfect in our humanity, and that are the keys to our success in whatever we want to do. So it's kind of a dual, I guess I'm just making this up as I go along. It's kind of a dual process of one, allowing, dislodging and allowing people to just let go of these old legacy ideas of who they are and why they're disqualified and what they need to do before they can get what they want. And at the same time, working very practically in this dimension, in this worldly dimension, of helping them manifest that individuality, bring out manifested individuality in ways that make a difference in the world. I'm not interested. Before, I kind of had more of a spiritual, and I would just want people to feel, I would love you to be peaceful and at ease and harmonious and transcendent. That's great. I mean that. And if it doesn't make a difference in the world, there's the old adage Rose said about, they're in the Zen monastery, and the bunch of monks go into the master and they bring a fish and say, Master, we found an enlightened fish. What do we do with him? And the master said, can he teach? And they said, no. And they said, eat him. So there's a little bit like, hey, I want to see an impact in the world. So I don't know if that answered your question. So I guess the easiest way to say it is I work with people and configurations of people to do just exactly what I said, which if I say anything more of it will just be repeating myself.
No, that was fantastic, Dave. Yeah. And it's interesting, just the conversations we've had, seeing you so seamlessly and easily move back and forth from a conversation that is very spiritually oriented and really encouraging people to look at themselves and who they are and how they're showing up as a person, and switching from that to a very practical conversation about, hey, how are you running your business? how are you marketing yourself? How are you presenting yourself to potential clients? And so easily and seamlessly connecting those two and moving back and forth between them, I think is something you do really wonderfully.
And I got to say, Scott, not everyone can hang with that, and you can. And I think that you also have this ability. And at first, it feels like you're toggling back and forth, like you do on a computer, between screens. But then I see it as one. I can't get a scalpel in between. Yeah, I mean, there's before we started, you said, let's sit quietly. And then you had to pull me out of it because I know we're never going to get this damn thing done if Dave just keeps meditating. So yeah, I can't say there aren't moments, there aren't, it's not transcendence, but to me, it's all when I lay down and my wife falls asleep and I stroke her hair, that's God. It's the 30 days in my cabin. When I came out of 30 days in my cabin, that's God, that's beauty, that's life, that's love, that's perfection. And so I think that toggling is one, it's not something it's something I am. And I think it's more of a resonance with the truth of how life is. And I want everyone to live that way.
Yeah.
And I can't, everyone will live that way. Everyone is living that way to some extent. Anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, it's wonderful, Dave. It's really wonderful for you to share this. And it's something that I absolutely, I enjoy talking about it because, I think if you were to ask me about like a profound spiritual experience that I've had, I might talk about some meditation retreat that I went on, at a Buddhist meditation center, or talk about something that happened to me while I was skydiving or windsurfing, like that practical aspect of the idea that whatever, the things that we're seeking, spirituality, all these different things that people seek, these higher purposes, are often right in front of us. And they occur so naturally in our everyday lives that all we have to do is open our eyes to them and see that they're there, right?
I have such ambivalence about, I don't even use, I got to come up with a new word for spiritual because I don't know how to do it the way that people understand kind of what I'm pointing towards. But the idea that some things are and some things aren't spiritual is such, to me, it's blasphemy, and it's robs people of the moment. Because when I went through, I'm thinking, if I wasn't doing this, it wasn't spiritual, then I am blind. I have got the blinders on.
Right.
And it's the same way that we say, until I kid about being married, until I no longer leave the toilet seat up, I will never be a good husband. It's like whatever it is that we think, until this, I can't be that.
Right.
Or unless life shows itself in this little narrow, and this gets to something too that we've talked about, and maybe it's a kind of transition, that everything that we most want resides in the unknown.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So here we're caught in this, and especially with you, with your brilliant work that you do with people with time, and what that means is that we want to control as much as we can. We want to be able to eliminate the variables. We want to maximize our influence and our impact. And at the same time, everything that our hearts most desire. And I know from my life, because like I say, I'm 70. People can see me. They'll say, hey, I don't look 70. I'm sure people just listening, I don't sound 70. I don't act like I'm 70, often to the chagrin of my wife. And, not often to the chagrin, occasionally the chagrin of my wife. I forget what the hell I was talking about. Oh yeah, but the control. But I mean, I never could have imagined that relationship. I thought, I'm going to become a man that a woman like that could love. And that's total bullshit. Then she's not loving me. She's loving this man, I think. And we're spending our life doing that. So anyway,
right.
So the question really is, if everything we want resides in the unknown, and we're not just going to go and plop in the middle of the street and say, I'm going to let, maybe I'll get run over, maybe I won't, but life will come and bring me this and that and the other thing. We're not going to do that. We're still going to live our lives purposefully, intelligently, tactically at times. Then what does that look like? Mm-hmm. What does that mean? How do we live a life that really maximizes the opportunity for the unimaginable to occur? And there's lots of stuff there. And I think I would, your thoughts on that, because I've been doing a lot of talking. And you and I have had some topics, discussions on this professionally and personally and otherwise. What does that sound like? What does that mean? How does that resonate with you?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the idea that everything we want resides in the unknown, that's it's one thing we've been talking about in our own personal lives. And just a little bit with my story, right? Which, um, when I was going to college, to me, why this is important. One of the reasons this is so important is because I talk to people and I hear people who are, especially younger people who are in college, let's say, right, and they're studying, and they start to really freak out because they feel like they don't like what they're studying, or they don't like what they're doing, or they're not sure, or and like, even you go to, we're high school, you're a teenager, right, and there's all this pressure to figure out exactly who you want to be and what you want to be and what you want to do for the rest of your life. Right, and you're like 15 years old and you're supposed to have this all figured out. Whether people explicitly say that or not, that's I think what a lot of people feel. And so, and that continues on, and we have this idea that we have to have, I mean, it is important to have a plan, but people have this idea that they have to know. They have to know. They have to have their whole life methodically planned out and know exactly what's going to happen for, the next 30 or 40 years and how it's all going to play out. And they have to be making precisely the right moves to make those things happen. And they're not allowing themselves sometimes to be open to the unknown. And, we were talking about, with my own experience, like when I was going to college and I had always wanted to skydive. I always wanted to jump out of an airplane. So I went and did it, and I loved it. And it became my, my passion, my hobby, and, a huge part of my life. And I eventually became an instructor and started doing it for a living, and spent 16 years working as a skydiving instructor. Worked at, Skydive to Land, major international training center, developed my own proprietary training program, which, ended up having a really big impact on the sport. And there was never a point before I made my first jump, and even after I made my first jump for a little while, there was never a point where I said, ooh, this is what I want to do for a living. I know this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. I just started doing it and enjoyed it, and saw these people who were instructors, and it looked like a fun thing to do. And so this idea of being okay with the fact that we don't actually know how life is going to play out. We don't know what opportunities are going to show up for us. So how do we go about living our lives and being purposefully productive, being satisfied with what we're doing? Like you were saying, we're not just going to lay down in the middle of the road and, see what runs over us, right? Like we want to live our everyday lives and we want to have plans, but how do we balance that with the idea that we really don't know what opportunities are going to present themselves? And how do we remain open to those possibilities and not looking through this, this paper towel tube of thinking that we have to have everything figured out? And that's just, as you were talking, that's what I was thinking, what came up for me.
And a couple of things. One is, I just want to say how lucky people are to have you in their lives, whether it's listening to this podcast or delivering an Amazon to your door, or working professionally with you, because you've lived it. I was writing a email to a guy, a podcast interviewer in Australia, and I said, you talk from it, not about it. So it's like you've actually lived. This isn't a research project for you. This is like like, how do I do this? Because it and if I can respond, kind of the back, as much to the back of the book, or as far upstream as I've gotten with this inquiry. And I'm fortunate to live it, and to live it with others, and watch the effects of it and see them. One cannot run this experiment of aligning with the unimaginable, as you very eloquently call it. One cannot align with the unimaginable without trust. You can't. I'm just telling you. I mean, I hate to sound didactic, or like, it's got to be this way, but show me the first person. Maybe life will just kick the crap out of you until you surrender. But even at that point, there's a way you have to take your hands off the wheel if the car is going to go where it needs to go.
Right.
And without that trust, and it's funny. I was just writing he's got a very successful business in Australia, which they help people buy, grow, and sell their companies. And he said, I really want to do more with people. I don't want to just make them rich. And he was talking about the cycles of just they buy and sell, and buy, grow, sell, buy, grow, sell. And no, what you want to do is you want to take that circle that just drops you off at the same place of not enoughness, right? Which I think I've seen so many successful people, serial entrepreneurs, for one thing. they build another one, it's still not enough, not enough. And you want to take that circle and you want to just spiral it a little bit, just unwind it enough that the upward spiral, they can start going into a spiral. And the spiral is that you start to trust. You start to trust whatever it is. For me, it was when Julie came into my life, I started trusting her more than I feared being made a fool of. Not like she'd make a fool of me, but life would make a fool of me because I'd fall for this woman and find out, whatever. I started to trust. And then the more I trusted, the more I loved, and the more her love was revealed and my love was revealed. And I wanted to trust more because I wanted more love. And then it starts to seep into my business. Like, oh my God, I think I know where I'm going. I would never have guessed I'd be I knew I'd be doing something like I'm doing, but the format I'm doing, I had to let life take me there. So I'd let go a little bit. And then people would come into my life, whoever, they're clients or like you, collaborators or whatever, unexpectedly. Oh, I can let go a little bit more. And the more I let go and the more that I trust, the more people come in, I let go, I'm free to get more, and it starts to go upward. And I want to say, it doesn't mean that I'm not stopping and assessing. I'm not bringing the totality of my life experience. I'm still bringing the totality of my life experience. What does it mean practically? Like I said, I've started businesses, I've sold businesses, I've made a ton of money, I've lost a ton of money, I've done all kinds of stuff. So all of that's in there, and I'm not going to excise that and pretend that I'm not the beginner's mind in the Zen sense that nothing's ever happened before. Stuff's happened, and I'm still going to bring that. But then your life becomes this beautiful dance where, and I'm just thinking, wow, this is my life right now. This is really cool because I can talk from it. Where you're surrendering, you're living in the unknown expectation. You sense something beautiful is going to happen. And then when it happens, you bring your full autonomy, the fullness of everything that you are and all your experience into that moment. And it just starts to weave together. And then you're in this beautiful dance with life. And it may sound like, oh, I got to be 70 years old, study with a crazy ass Zen teacher for 20 years, study with another for 12, go through a divorce. No. This is accessible to everybody right now. And I think one of the great ways to do it, and this again is your expertise, is time. It's like, where do we chew into something like this? And in the most basic ways, I think it's how we relate to time, because that's something that affects our life, but also reveals our life. And maybe you could talk a little bit about that, because I know this is your stock and trade.
Well, yeah. I mean, our relationship with time. And I think, in a moment or two, I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about this great analogy you have about how we relate to time. But absolutely transforming, this is my, like you say, area of expertise, empowering leaders to transform their relationship with work and time so that they're no longer struggling with some of these concepts that we allow ourselves to be burdened with about how we work, about how we manage time, right? About what it means to be productive, but really examining our beliefs about that and finding ways to be productive in a satisfying way. Like I always tell people, my job isn't to help you do more, right? Or get more done in a day. My goal is to have people feel more satisfied with what they've done at the end of the day, more satisfied with what they've done at the end of the week, whether that means doing more or doing less, and exploring that. But you said, you talked about trust, because this is what you were just discussing, and this idea of being open to possibilities is so powerful. And, what do we trust? You talked about, meeting your wife, Julie, and trusting her. And sometimes that is it. It's trusting a person. Trusting a person, and this is something I've discovered, is trusting the people who believe in us. Right? Because it's so easy. We have these, maybe wonderful people in our lives, and this could be, a parent, sibling, relative, friend, spouse, whoever it is, people who trust us and believe in us. And sometimes I think it's easy to take that for granted. And we sometimes don't realize, sometimes we don't have the same trust in ourselves that they have in us. And if we respect those people and love those people, to be able to respect them enough to say, okay, I believe them. I believe in the trust they have in me. And that's been incredibly inspiring and motivating for me, at different times in my life. And trusting, as we've had previous conversations about this, and I was thinking about this even this morning, the idea of, trusting myself. I mean, I've had whatever you want to call it, imposter syndrome, low self-esteem, all the buzzwords, right? I've experienced those things in my life many, many, many times. But what I always trusted and what I always believed in was my ability to be happy and my desire to be happy.
Wow.
So believing that was possible, it was possible to be happy, and believing that on some level I deserved to be happy and I wanted to be happy, right? And that's been a guiding force through some of these, changes I went through, like, having my really successful coaching business in skydiving when I was doing that, and realizing through different series of events that it wasn't really what I wanted out of life anymore. And making, again, the idea of being open to possibility, and everything that we want is in the unknown, stepping out of that business, stepping away from that business, stepping out of that life that I built for myself into a great, huge amount of uncertainty, right? Moved out of state, just stopped skydiving, stopped doing that for a living, and not really knowing exactly what I was going to do next. Kind of had roughly had an idea, but really had no idea what I was going to do next. Ended up working for a nonprofit, right? Work for a wildlife sanctuary that you got the tiger paw print up here. I never said actively planned and methodically planned and said, I want to work in the nonprofit sector and I want to work for a wildlife sanctuary. I just started volunteering at the place and loved it. And one day the volunteer coordinator came up and said, hey, there's an open position coming up and, maybe you want to apply for it. The other opportunity that I had in the test prep world, right? A friend of mine said, hey, I've been working for this great company and I think you would be a really good fit. I mean, I never planned to spend 7 years, whatever it was, teaching these prep courses for the law school admission test, right? Like I had no idea what, that was going to come into my life. And yet this opportunity just like literally dropped on the table in front of me almost, right? And so to me, I think what has been helpful and what I encourage other people to explore is the idea of being comfortable with the unknown, being comfortable with not knowing. And, it can be very scary. It can be very, very scary to step away from something that is secure, that is your comfort zone, that the step away from what you know and say, I'm going to do this without knowing what the outcome is going to be. But it's in the direction that I want. And I don't even know what the end result is going to be. I don't even know where this road is taking me, but this feels like the direction that I want to go. So let's go down that road and see what's there. Let's explore. And I know that's something that you've lived and experienced too.
We're going to pause here, but we hope you'll join us for part 2 of this episode, where Dave and I continue our conversation about trusting ourselves and trusting the unknown.
We only trust as much as we've allowed trust to prove itself. I don't know if that makes sense. In other words, I can't ask my daughter to do something that I haven't done myself. And incidentally, that was my road to vulnerability. When I realized that I couldn't ask my daughter to be more vulnerable than I was. And that really put me on an expedited path of vulnerability.
All of this and more is in part 2 of episode 1 of Task Time Energy, the Purpose-Filled Productivity Podcast. You can learn more about Dave on his website, davegold.com, and go to my website, scottmillercoaching.com, to learn about an event that Dave and I are hosting on the first day of spring, March 20th, 2022.